Please welcome David Staley, Associate Professor in the Department of History at The Ohio State University, where he teaches courses in digital history and historical methods. David holds courtesy appointments in the departments of design, where he has taught courses in design history and design futures, and educational studies, where he has led the Forum on the University.
Thank you and good morning. Isn't it wonderful to be back together again? Feels a little strange to me, but it's still very wonderful, I think, to be back together again. It's been my experience that after big context-altering moments like the pandemic, futurists seem to be in greater demand. So I spend some of my time as a futurist, and I can tell you there have been lots of people over the last 2 years that have been seeking out my advice, I suppose. They say, wow, tell us what we're missing, or help us predict the next big thing. But as I say to every audience, futurists can't really predict the future. The future is a little more complex than that. What futurists can offer, however, is clarity, not certainty about the future. So please allow me to provide some clarity about our future. Our post-pandemic world will be characterized by what I'm calling perpendicular change. The pandemic changed everything overnight, upending our beliefs about how the future was going to progress. From early reports of a new respiratory illness in Wuhan in January of 2020, all of a sudden the economy was shut down by April. Change at a right angle to the trend line. That is perpendicular change. Anticipating, leveraging, even creating perpendicular change will be our chief strategic objective for a post-pandemic world. So, what kind of perpendicular change might we expect? There are indications that the remote work that was forced upon us by the pandemic will become a regular feature of business life. Before the pandemic, most workers were co-located together with a smaller number of floating remote workers. That ratio was upended by the pandemic. And after the pandemic, it will be the majority of workers who will be remote, untethered from offices. This means, among other things, that the meaning and function of the office will be altered. No longer simply a warehouse for workers, the office will be the location of occasional face-to-face work. More significantly, the office will become symbolically important. It will still be necessary for companies to have a physical location, preferably at some sort of eye-catching address, maybe a Gay Street address or some location downtown. This will still be a signifier of the heft of the company. Offices will become an extension of the brand as a space of curated experiences, both for customers and for employees. More remote workers means that many organizations will become decentralized, with workers scattered at some distance from the main office. What will this mean for the management of complex organizations? Will companies require fewer layers of management, inasmuch as management involves monitoring employees? Remote workers might therefore enjoy greater autonomy, free to make more decisions without the approval of someone above them. Hierarchies will certainly flatten, with organizations managed by self-organization based on the individual decisions of workers. The increase in the number of remote workers has led to the emergence of what's being called Zoom towns. Many companies are discovering that those remote workers are moving to places that provide them a better quality of life, that allow them to be closer to family, that offer more affordable housing. I can think of no better place than Central Ohio. Some towns, some secondary cities have capitalized on this, looking to lure remote knowledge workers. The relocation of remote workers will likely refashion settlement patterns, like the mass movement to suburbia in the 1950s, or Siberia, which is not a movie you wanted to make. But I also think this move towards Zoom towns is going to widen the geographic scope of the knowledge economy. The pandemic has also accelerated a trend I'm calling the new mobility. When we use the word mobility today, we're usually talking about the infrastructure of moving people around the world. Much of the talk about mobility has to do with autonomous vehicles and the role they'll be playing in how we move from place to place. Of course, Columbus has been an experimental location for this. But scooters, bicycles, light rail, dare I say even Hyperloop, are all parts of the debates about how we will transport ourselves across the city and across the region. I believe that our ideas about mobility, indeed the very definition of mobility itself, will be changing over the next 10 years. Rather than referring to the movement of the individual out in the world, the new mobility means bringing the world to the individual, where it's the world or reality that's made mobile and deliverable. What makes the new mobility new is that it's not just things that are being made more easily deliverable. Experiences are also being made mobile and deliverable. Telemedicine, education, we learned this during the pandemic. These are such experiences that have been made mobile. But the gym experience was made mobile through Peloton, Mirror. I think the metaverse, that virtual reality experience, will no doubt be a key technology of the new mobility. From work to commerce to entertainment, I'll be able to bring a wealth of experiences to me in my home. Indeed, I think the next wave of entrepreneurial activity will most assuredly involve identifying some part of the real world that we assume to be immobile and mobilizing it, delivering that portion of reality to a consumer at home. There are signs that globalization as an economic and geopolitical reality is coming to an end. We heard the Lieutenant Governor say something to that effect. After the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, Western liberal capitalism remained standing as the victor, unleashing the spread of global markets and supply chains. Globalization was characterized by the relatively free movement of products, services, expertise, and talent. The development of the World Wide Web at around the same time fostered a system of global communications. Information, ideas, and culture spread as freely as automobiles and consumer goods. Even before COVID-19, there were signs that globalization might be coming to an end. Global competition between the US and China suggests that separate economic spheres are emerging. This fragmentation, or the fragmentation that this represents, can lead one to ask if we can continue to speak about global trade in the future. Some in the West have expressed concerns about the hold China seems to have over critical global supply chains. Even before the COVID-induced economic collapse, there were voices calling for the shortening of global supply lines. Building the Intel chip factory is one unmistakable sign of this desire to bring manufacturing closer to home. One must also wonder what will next happen to the global flow of capital. But at the same time, there are signals that the relatively free movement of ideas, what I'm calling Zoom globalization, might persist, even if the economic infrastructure of globalization has collapsed. It's possible that global communications via Zoom or some other such platform will remain in place. Employees of multinational corporations may continue to work together via Zoom, their online avatars crossing international boundaries. Only inasmuch as such transnational work continues will it be possible to say that Zoom globalization will persist, even as economic globalization collapses. One effect of the pandemic has been the rise of employee activism, the Great Resignation, perhaps its greatest expression. But I see this global employee activism as a symptom of a much larger phenomenon, what I'm calling essentialism. There's an emerging philosophical movement where people are asking, what's truly essential in my life? Some are asking, is my job essential to my life? Others are starting to seek meaning and fulfillment in something other than the job. Even if the Great Resignation comes to an end, and there's all sorts of evidence that it is, look for this deeper essentialist movement to persist. Perhaps the most important change to come out of the pandemic, perhaps the most important what's next question that you should be asking is the notion of what I've called perpendicular change. We often describe the future as one of rapid change, or according to a recent book, one of exponential change. If the pandemic and the recent war in Ukraine have taught us anything, it's that change is perpendicular, unexpected, and context-altering. Events seem to be moving along at a predictable trend line when suddenly those events move at a right angle to the expected direction of change. The economy was humming along at a brisk pace until it wasn't. China was the great geopolitical concern for the United States until it wasn't. What we've learned over the last 2 years is that the unexpected deviation from the trend line is not the exception, but the rule, the way the world actually operates. Thus, it's not the pace of change or the acceleration of change that we must prepare for. It is unexpected change that must guide our strategic thinking. To prepare for and thrive under conditions of perpendicular change, every organization needs a chief futures officer. Who in your organization is anticipating and thinking about perpendicular change? Who in your organization is leveraging perpendicular change? Who in your organization is creating perpendicular change? I ask these questions not just simply of the companies represented here, but of the Columbus Chamber, the Columbus Partnership, the City of Columbus as well. Because if the pandemic taught us anything, the future you expect is not the future you're going to get. Thank you.